Mr. Derek Veenhoff.
He's better known as Deek.
Drinking liquor with DJ Deek, we out laughing.
Yo, Deek.
Welcome everybody back to the Deekast. I'm your host, Deekatello, and it's episode 94, and we have a panel today. Welcome, guys. We have Dr. Kevin Folta, Mick West, and Lalo Dagach. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hi, nice to be here.
Welcome back. Multiple time guests, all three of you. And I'll give you guys a quick intro so you know who you're listening to here. So Dr. Kevin Folta is from the University of Florida. He works in genomics, plant genomics, and he's actually sequenced the strawberry genome. And he has a podcast called the Talking Biotech podcast. And he's concerned with science communications. So we're glad to have him here today for that. Welcome, Kevin.
That was perfect. Yeah, that's
short and sweet. And Mick West, of course, you might remember him from creating the Tony Hawk Pro Skater video game series. Retired video game programmer turned skeptic, UFO investigator, talking head media personality lately. Of course, UFOs is such a big topic. Welcome, Mick.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And last but not least, Lalo Dagach, the Chilean Palestinian, as some call him. We've learned from him over the podcast he's been on that Chile has the largest population of Palestinians outside of Palestine, 5 to 6 times that of in the United States. So very interesting stuff. And Lalo is interested in politics, religion, cults, and topics like that. He has his own podcast as well, the Lalo Dagach podcast. So welcome, Lalo.
Thanks for inviting me again.
No problem. So, gentlemen, today we have some big topics. Everybody knows the big topics in the news and the Twitter world is this concept of UFO sightings and disclosure that is supposedly upcoming. And we also have this COVID origins theory, the Wuhan lab leak theory, you might call it. And the latest on that front, I believe, is gain of function, or they're calling it the gain of function Twitter even. There's a whole subset of tweeters who are obsessed with this concept of gain of function. We'll get into all the specifics, but maybe we can start with the UFO stuff. And for that, we'll turn to Mick. And Mick, for people who don't know much about it, could you give a brief sort of overview and a history of, or recent history of these Navy videos and the subsequent debunking and where we're at now?
Well, I've given my explanation, the discussions of this before. I was wondering if maybe we could actually start with the other two guests and get their perspective of what they see as being the UFO thing. I'm really interested in how different people perceive it, and if I just kind of give my full spiel, it'll kind of corrupt their perspectives.
I really like that.
We could start with that.
Yeah, I know Kevin has mentioned he might have seen some UFOs before. So Kevin, I don't know if you wanted to start.
well, my perspective is already corrupted. So I can give my 2 cents. I actually was a member of MUFON for a long time, and I served as a debunker in chief in that realm. And it doesn't make you any friends in the UFO world to be a debunker, because they want to be true believers. This recent stuff is really interesting because you see people automatically default to unidentified flying object to little green men from Mars. And that's the problem, is that it doesn't mean intelligent life from somewhere else. It means that it's something we can't explain. And I haven't been on top of the debunking of this particular thing, but it's been really interesting to see the videos. And if I was North Korea, I'd be claiming it was mine. And I would be, saying that these were something that we created. At least give people the idea that we had something going on with some superior drone technology or something. But I was looking forward to hearing, what others actually thought about this one. It's just, for me, it just bothers me that I constantly see the default to it must be aliens from another planet, when there's probably a very simple explanation.
Right. So Lalo, what do you think?
So it's not the topic I research a lot anymore. It used to be. I actually used to be really, really into UFOs growing up, because I am a huge fan of science fiction. I was a huge fan of the original X-Files show. And I read a lot of, science fiction novels when I was young, from Ray Bradbury and Isaac Asimov. But as I grew older and I started to moderate what I believe in by the amounts of scientific information there is of it, proven, tangible, tested information. You just see that it's a lot of hearsay and personal testimonies, and there's nothing really that concrete around it. And there was an old I had these old comic books from like the 50s or 60s, 70s, around then. It was just, these really old, like multi-story written by science fiction authors. And there was an interview with I believe it was Ray Bradbury, where he said that what bothered him most about UFOs was that when people say they saw a UFO, they interpret that to mean a flying saucer with green men in it, and that UFO just means unidentified flying objects. And I hear still people saying this, like in Joe Rogan podcast, for example. It's like, do you believe in UFOs? It's a strange thing to say. Do you believe in something that's unknown? It's a contradiction in itself, right? Do you believe something that we don't know what it is? Well, what is there to believe? You definitively can say like there's something unidentified flying there. When you start jumping to conclusions as to what it is, then you go down simply, hypotheticals or somebody's personal opinion. I do think it's not impossible or even technically unlikely that there is alien life and possibly traveling, even, it's not outside the realm of possibility as far as science or even how much intelligent life there could be in the universe. If you look at Drake's equation and say how much intelligent life could there be, if the universe is infinite, how much opportunities there is for life, sure. But just because there's a possibility doesn't mean that's what we're looking at. I do think it's almost more unlikely that these are human technologies that are just astronomically ahead of all technologies, because technology doesn't work that way. It doesn't jump 100 steps ahead. It would be absurd if they are playing around with technologies that are that seem infinitely more advanced than the B-2 stealth bomber or something like that. Why would you hide, and how could you hide that much technology over so much time? You would use it to some degree outside of just having some kind of light fly around in the sky. You would use it for practical reasons. We use technologies for all kinds of different things, right? From our microwave to our phones or things like that. You wouldn't have this super advanced technology just to fly it around in the sky. So I don't think that's very likely. I think it could be, if it's aliens. If they said there was a flying saucer and we discovered it tomorrow and it was aliens and little green men, I'd be like, okay, yeah, it seems extremely likely that could be the case. But I'm not going to believe anything unless I see more concrete evidence. I do think these new interviews that are coming out and videos that are semi-confirmed, maybe by the government, it's not clear to me if anything is actually a government official saying these are real, but it's always fun and it's always interesting and we can speculate. But when people have to moderate their expectations and their beliefs,
Yeah, it's all that is true. I think it's a fascinating thing. I think there's kind of two stories going on here. One is the evidence that people are putting out there. That's kind of, some of it is new and interesting, and some of it is kind of compelling. And then the other is kind of what's going on behind the scenes. Like, why are we at this position? Why are people actually talking about it now? Who is pushing these narratives? From my perspective, I kind of got into it around 2017. I was never really a big UFO guy before then. I was more into other conspiracy theories like chemtrails and 9/11, conspiracy theories, people saying that 9/11 was controlled demolition and things like that. But I was very interested in the chemtrails thing. Part of what you do in debunking the chemtrails conspiracy theory is that people will put up videos of planes spraying things, and you've got to identify the plane. So I developed a skill set in identifying planes, especially ones leaving contrails. And then there was a case that came up in Chile, which was this Chilean Navy UFO video, which was lauded as being like the best UFO video ever, the best UFO case, like proven to be unidentified by the Chilean Air Force. And that turned out to be something I recognized straight away as being a plane leaving a contrail. And so I kind of explained that to people, and solve that case, and that kind of got me kind of a bit more interested in UFOs. And that kind of coincided a few months later with this story in the New York Times, which was quite an amazing development, really. You know, the New York Times doing a story about UFOs was kind of a sea change in the way the media takes it seriously or not. And they were saying that the government is investigating UFOs. And then they released these videos, and I investigated these videos and found plausible explanations for them. But then there's also eyewitness accounts that sound quite plausible. And I've kind of become, just because I enjoy investigating these little 3D puzzles of where is this thing in space, I've become like the de facto UFO narrative debunker, and people started calling me up. And so now I kind of got sucked in from just simply being the technical analyst into talking about the people. One of the things you might have seen recently that sounded very compelling is the 60 Minutes piece on UFOs, where they interviewed two pilots, David Fravor and Alex Deitrich. And in that interview, David Fravor says, he says literally, all four of us watched this thing for 5 minutes. But then later on Twitter, I was talking to Alex Deitrich about it, and I noted that she said it was like 8 to 10 seconds. And I asked her what she meant by 8 to 10 seconds. And she said the entire thing, from her perspective, only took 8 to 10 seconds. So even with these eyewitness accounts that sound super compelling, there's these gaping holes. I went on to interview her at length. I did like a 45-minute interview with her where she basically confirmed, yes, she only saw it for 10 seconds. And yet it's been portrayed as being this thing that with all these different eyewitness accounts that match exactly. And in fact, they're radically different. So the evidence does not hold up to scrutiny. And it's really interesting that it's being put out there as something that actually does. Do we have people who are inept looking at the evidence, or are they actually pushing the evidence in a certain way because they really believe that there are aliens and they don't really care very much about the quality? It's fascinating stuff.
Yes, that again, it's another one of these things that ties these larger topics together, the COVID origins and the UFO stuff, because it speaks to that fact that, well, our fallibility with eyewitness accounts as well, which is documented in psychology and in court systems, and if I'm correct, and also the concept that in every field there's 1 to 2 to 3% of people who believe something crazy or don't know what they're talking about. Like somebody could have a PhD in virology, but could also believe that the oceans give you healing powers, like Judy Mikovits, things like that.
Some virologists in Chile are actually anti-vaxxers.
Yeah. In Chile, Lalo, you could tell us more about this, but in Chile, they have it's a bit of a tangent, but we have one of the best vaccination rates in Chile, but they're locking down the main cities again. Now, is that because of lack of additional restrictions in coinciding with the vaccines, or you mentioned that it's a lot of the older risk people haven't been vaccinated?
Right. So I actually was just having a debate with somebody today, and it's a debate I'm constantly having lately because of Chile, because the anti-vaxxers have latched onto Chile because of this reason, because Chile has been in the forefront among like the top 3 countries for many weeks now, as far as the amount of people they're vaccinating. And they're using Chile as an example of vaccinations not working because the amount of people getting sick and in the ERs are the highest they've ever been. And so they're saying, well, this is proof that our anti-vax ideas were true. And this is a perfect example of conspiracy theory thinking and people just jumping to conclusions without looking deeper into it. And it's widely reported. It's reported in every hospital all over the country every day here that over 95% of the people in the ERs didn't get vaccinated. Most of them chose not to. Most of them are very young. They're not the elderly who are normally getting sick. So what happened? That the vaccination came to Chile. The government was really good about distributing it. They bought it early. They organized really well, ranked top of the lists in countries vaccinating their people. What happened? Everybody relaxed because there's a very high level of people who are anti-vax in Chile. When the vaccine came to Chile, they started, just before it came, they did a study. How many people are going to immediately get vaccinated. 50% said immediately, half the country. Another 30% said, I'm going to wait. I'm not going to take it when it's my turn. 20% said never. So what happened? Months went by. Yes, they were distributing the vaccine very well, but millions, 30% of the country, almost 1/3, didn't go when it was their turn. So, and then 20 just said never. So half the country waited. So what happened? The numbers started rising because everyone who didn't get vaccinated also thought, well, the people who should have gotten vaccinated, the rest of you, not me, but the rest of you did, I can go out now. I can live my life.
Mm-hmm.
Mass gatherings everywhere, people partying again, people walking around without masks, etc. Everything that we were trying to accomplish went to hell. So the vaccine actually worked against us in that way where people thought, oh, the vaccine came, therefore everything's fine. But they didn't get vaccinated and they went out.
Yeah.
So it worked against them that way. What happened now is that Chile, the Chilean government, tried to push people to get it by saying, you're going to need now some kind of ID of vaccination to use public transportation. Suddenly, hundreds of thousands of people are showing up to vaccination centers to get vaccinated, but it's not their turn anymore. They're complaining. They're angry now. It's their fault completely. But this is a case of people using numbers to believe what they want. And yeah, I'm sure Mick has seen this countless times, and it's simply not true. So when they talk about who's in the ERs right now, it's 95% of people who aren't vaccinated. Most of them chose not to. The other 5% are people who only had the first shot, or got the second shot but very recently, or are in the como in espacio de riesgo. It's like they're in risk, meaning they are obese or they're smokers or they have asthma, etc. And that makes up all of the rest of those 5%. People who are not in that risk percentage got both vaccinations and had about 2 weeks after of time, practically zero, way less than 0.01%. But people I keep getting people telling me, you're one of the highest countries that were vaccinated, yet your hospitals are full. See proof. No. So, and this happens with every conspiracy theory.
Well, and again, this is again a bit of a tangent, but it relates in that sense that people who have a misunderstanding of a larger scope of how science works, or how statistics works, or how any of these things, a little bit of a deeper level of how they work. The average person is not primed to fully understand that, so they'll use these types of stats to confirm their biases. Now, Mick, when you interviewed Alex, what changed with your perspective after interviewing her, or how did you perceive her credibility in that?
Well, I think she's always been fairly credible in that she's telling very much things as she remembers them, and she often prefaces what she's saying with that memory might have changed, and that she might have misperceived things, or that she might be misremembering them. And this is kind of in contrast to the other pilot, David Fravor, who's basically been rock solid with his account of things since the start. And but what happened, of course, is that now we have two accounts, whereas before it seemed like we only had one account. Their accounts didn't really line up before, and now we've got this vast discrepancy. And what was more interesting for me than just simply what she said was the reaction of people on Twitter, this kind of UFO Twitter subculture. Like you get, an anti-vax subculture or whatever on Twitter, You've got a UFO subculture on Twitter, and they were very kind of upset, and they were almost saying, no, that makes no difference whatsoever. And, it doesn't matter, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, what's the difference? People perceive things differently, which of course is complete nonsense. If you're describing a complicated set of maneuvers in the air, and one person says it takes 5 minutes and the other one says it takes 10 seconds, this is a very, very different type of thing. And yet people were trying to shoehorn an explanation of it into their brains, which is just kind of impossible. They couldn't do it. You have to accept that this discrepancy is there, and then you've got to say, why is the discrepancy? Is it because they're misremembering it, or is it because she's got the correct one and he hasn't, or he has and she hasn't, or neither of them have the correct explanation? You think you got to be honest in your approach to these things. And just real quick, like you're talking about statistics there, one of the things that the UFO people do a lot is create these correlations between things, which I'm sure you see all the time with things like epidemiology, that people will say things like, here are the hotspots, and they'll show a map of the United States, and the hotspots are going to be, Los Angeles, New York, and somewhere in Florida, and all it is they're showing basically maps of population. And the UFO people like to say UFOs like to focus on nuclear bases, and then they'll just list the few cases out of the hundreds of thousands of cases that are at nuclear bases, which get a little bit more attention because, like, it's more of a security issue. So sometimes people write more about them, but there's no more cases there than there is anywhere else. But because you pick the ones that happens to be in that location, then they just say there's a correlation. So it's really almost dishonest. I don't think it's entirely dishonest. Sometimes I think people just want to believe, and so they like to make these connections, but a lot of the time it verges on dishonesty.
Well, it's like the Bermuda Triangle, right? The Bermuda Triangle is, as a kid, I loved those stories. Like, I was always like, why is all this stuff happening in this one triangle between? But then you realize that the same amount of ships go missing and planes go missing in every other area of the ocean. They're just picking a spot and showing you the stories from that. And if you don't know the stories from elsewhere, how are you going to know any better? You have nothing to compare it to. You don't have all the data, which is the case in all these things. And another parallel that comes to mind is when people tell you, Mick, that, well, we think it's this, and you can't tell us what it is. Oh, you say it's a balloon, or oh, you say it's a, like they'll poke fun at that. The same with the Wuhan origin of the coronavirus. They say, because the exact animal hasn't been found, or patient zero hasn't fully been found, or whatever, they'll say, that you whatever, that you can't give the answer, so therefore you don't.
So if you can't give an exact answer, then their answer must be correct.
Yes.
It's like if you've got 2 or 3 possibilities that it might be, but you can't pick between one of them, then it's demons did it, because that's the only possible explanation they can think of, or it was manufactured in the lab and released deliberately to disrupt the world economy, because you can't figure out which particular animal is the intermediate vector.
Of course. And I realize we're jumping around a little bit, but there's a lot of let's let Kevin jump in here, and Zoom is asking me to enter some details here, so let me talk to Zoom here while I ask Kevin. Can we talk about the zoonotic viruses in general, and sort of why the scientists actually do sort of agree on the origin so far of what we know, and why the media is maybe getting it incorrect? Could you talk about that?
Yeah, it's actually a pretty interesting story, because zoonotic transfer of viruses is nothing new. We see it happen actually very frequently, and as humans begin to continue to impinge upon wild environments where where these viruses are known to exist. We know that coronaviruses exist in wild repositories, and whether it's bats, pangolins, whatever, those are there. And folks like Peter Daszak and others have studied this for a long time and identifying, where is the next likely outbreak going to occur. And so this is nothing new. Ebola, they know patient zero came from a bat, that it was a butchered bat, that they know who patient zero was and how that was transferred. So this didn't seem like a bridge too far. The reason the media gets it wrong is kind of interesting when we consider the UFO stuff. Here, the media is jumping to what is the most convenient explanation, right? It's Wuhan, which is the Wuhan Center of Virology. This is where they study this stuff. And in the city is where this first outbreak happened. And I get that. It's like if there was an oil slick on the ocean, you might look at the tanker and go, well, maybe we should look there first. But until you have much more definitive evidence, it's very difficult to, it's impossible to say anything more than this is just a hypothesis, at least the lab leak theory. Lab leak hypothesis, I'm sorry. The much more likely example is one of these natural repositories. And when folks are slaughtering wild animals like bats and pangolins and everything else for flesh, it is possible, it is just as plausible, if not more likely, that would be a center of the explanation. And we may never find it in a wild repository that's an exact match. But at least at this point, there's no evidence pointing to an internal leak. And the idea of this being a deliberate leak, I think, is totally off the table, because if you're China, you have more sophistication than to have a deliberate leak happen in the city where the virology place is. That, if it was going to be a deliberate leak, you might, have somebody go to Hawaii and let it out there. Do something that would separate you geographically from it. Wuhan's a city of 60 million people. I mean, huge cities in China. And it is plausible. They're a population center. They're where everybody travels through Wuhan to go to other parts of China. So it's very likely that either it originated there, or there's much more plausible reasons why Wuhan would have been a center for the original cases of the coronavirus. And
speaking of like the deeper science, like the cleavage site and these different things that virologists discuss, what are some of the most obvious reasons why they do agree that it didn't have a man-made origin?
Well, it doesn't have any real discrete signatures that indicate that this is something that's a manipulated virus. And there's ways that we would be able to identify certain signatures that would really be dead giveaways. But it does appear to be simply and people talk about, the furan cleavage site and all these other features that occur that are not naturally, they're not likely to occur in the known subset of coronaviruses. So therefore, it must be man-made. That's a jump I can't make. These things happen as natural mutations, and mutations occur every day, especially in rapidly occurring viruses, rapidly replicating viruses, where trillions of them occur inside an infected person. So, or an infected bat, for that matter. So, to me, it's not a far-out hypothesis to suggest that these kinds of changes can occur naturally and do occur naturally. Just that we only notice the ones that are zoonotically transferred.
Now, could we play the devil's advocate, perhaps, and pretend that we are, if we are Peter, what was his last name?
Daszak.
If we're him and we're the WHO team, we're investigating there, and is it the security of the lab? Like, what is the most plausible if we were to try to play the devil's advocate there?
Well, that's the big problem is how especially in China, how do you get into this? If I'm China, and they're always very secretive about research that happens in national interest. If this is a laboratory which has had more transparency than most Chinese laboratories, I would guess, because they have worked with the West. But it's a very at this point, I would not expect the most transparency from them. Because they're, when everybody's pointing the finger at you, and you either know you didn't do something wrong, or in the worst case, that they know they did something wrong, or somebody did walk out with something. I don't think you're going to get a lot of answers or cooperation from the Chinese government on this one. I just don't imagine that they would be excited to open the doors, open the books, and say, "Come on in, let's take a look around, see what you like."
Of course, and that makes a lot of sense. I don't know, Lalo, if you have anything to say there, because you're interested in those type of topics. And
yeah, well, I'm not a scientist by any degree, but I do try to do I even took a class online about viruses to try and get some grasp on this. And searching around, I feel very, very bad for virologists in the world right now, because I found countless articles and videos of virologists. I sent you one today from named Kirsty Short from 2018, and I saw so many videos of virologists saying, flu viruses happen all the time, and we're looking at the next pandemic coming, and it's probably going to come from China. They all said this. And looking back, doing some more research, you see that a lot of pandemics throughout history for centuries have originated in China. It's thought that the Black Death originated in China, the Spanish flu started in China and started mutating from the United States and then to Europe. And the amount of flu strains yearly, I think it was around 80% come from China. The reason for this is because of the consumption of these wildlife animals that they sell in wet markets. Wet markets aren't exclusively for those kind of selling of animals, but they do sell those kind of animals there. And when people are looking to blame China, because that's the intention around the lab theory. On a political level, which I can contribute more to, is the reason behind people saying online they want the lab theory to be true more than the market theory to be true. And why is that? People see that if a virus came out of a lab, it's more intentional, it's more nefarious. Doesn't matter what's true, what the evidence says, they don't care. It's going to look like China's more to blame. The problem is that's not true. China would be equally to blame if it came from a wet market, because these wet markets have been a problem for decades now. Virologists say they're a problem. They shouldn't have them. These are animals the pangolin and they're eating. Jackie Chan has videos online where he's advocating, and he's an activist against the consumption of wildlife animals because they have all these strange beliefs about having curative properties and things like that. So these animals that live in forests interact with bats, which pigs and cows that live on farms don't. These animals in forests, they do. They get transmission from, because bats carry thousands of viruses at the same time. For some reason, they just don't die from. It's believed maybe it's their heart rate that's very high. I don't know much about that. But they originate a lot of the viruses in these markets. And you know how much the selling of wildlife in China, how much of a big industry that is? How much money do you think that's worth? 100 million, a billion, 75 billion.
Wow.
I'll say it again. 75 billion is how much that industry of selling wildlife in China is worth. It's not an easy thing to stop. There's way too much money involved. So they don't want to stop it. It could even be that China prefer that people believe the lab theory. Because if they didn't, they would demand they close those markets. That's a huge amount of money, and China really cares about how much money flows around their country. So, they think they're blaming China more with the lab theory. Not necessarily. China. I would also say it doesn't matter if it came from a lab or a wet market. It doesn't really matter. Both are dangerous, but wet markets are way more dangerous, I'd say. Most flu strains come from these wet markets, not labs. The probability that there would be an accident and another virus would come from a lab is very low compared to these wet markets. These are breeding grounds specifically for viruses in these markets. So they're a problem either way. Even if it did come from a lab, these markets are a huge problem. And it's very sad to me that the conversation around closing this industry of selling wildlife lasted in the news cycle a week, and then everyone says it was racist to even talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, rabies even is a disease that comes from animals. I mean, there are, the bird flu, like it's in the name. Not to sound like Jon Stewart, who said
MERS came from camels. There was another one that came, I think, from Australia, from horses. But if you look at any of those viruses, all of them came from an animal, yes, but before that, it originated from a bat. And that I believe so. Kevin can correct me because science is more his topic.
Yeah, and Kevin, maybe you could talk about gain of function research too a little bit. But speaking to the, it is. I understand why people jump, in a sense, to the lab leak theory, just because it is so convoluted and the investigation is ongoing, and it's something that we can't look back at in full. It's like
people love the idea of the conspiracy too. They love the idea of like the UFO and the government, like the X-Files thing, where everything they were investigating, the government was behind it. The Chinese government was
exciting.
behind it.
It is exciting, but with the gain of function research, was there some politics behind really digging into that, because the US was doing some gain of function research that they almost didn't want to shed light on, and there was sort of a discouragement to focus on that. So Kevin, what is gain of function research? Is it a preventative method for pandemics as far as research goes, and how does it work in that?
Well, gain of function research is really one subset of what we call structure function research. So you have a virus with a DNA sequence, and the question is now, when you change that sequence, what happens? And sometimes, most of the time, when you change the sequence, nothing happens. So you get no change in function. Sometimes you obliterate the function. So you make a mutation which changes the ability of this thing to be transmitted or to replicate. But sometimes you have mutations that actually cause what they call gain of function, that you have an enhancement of either its ability to replicate, its ability to infect, its ability to shake hands with the receptor on the cell, its ability to do whatever, to zoonotically transfer. So these are things that happen when, so gain of function research is sometimes the way that you can understand or try to better understand the changes that will occur that will be deleterious. It helps us make predictions and helps us make changes that can reinforce practice, whether health practice, whether it's wet markets or whatever, also inform the development of the next generation of vaccines. And so right now, that's a hot area. How do we anticipate that changes that are occurring may affect the ability of SARS-CoV-2 to be transmitted or to be lethal? It's lethal to change its morbidity or mortality. And that's going to be dependent upon, and so that information is coming from gain of function research. And that's directly translating, likely right now, into preparation and even perhaps stockpiling of vaccines to combat the next generation of virus.
Now, why is it fraught with controversy? Is it just the security of the lab that's in question? I mean, you visited that specific lab in Wuhan, have you not?
Well, I haven't been to that particular laboratory. I've been to Wuhan before, and it was one of the more polluted places I've ever been. I mean, you couldn't see down the street. Great food, though. But the thing about gain of function research is that nobody likes to think that laboratories or scientists are coming up with ways to make viruses more deadly.
Right.
And I think that's all it is. But realistically, you have to be able to do that kind of research to understand how the DNA sequence translates to a protein sequence that can have more, that can change the properties of that virus. It's just simple research that helps us understand the virus better. And that way we're in a better position to combat it when it happens.
Mick or Lalo, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what's interesting to me here is kind of the parallels that you kind of raised here with the stuff that I look at, particularly conspiracy theories. And I think that one thing is the idea of having somebody to blame is very important. Like, we've either got on the one hand this kind of freak of nature, this accident of nature, this inevitability of viruses mutating and pandemics happening, which has happened before, which is just this it's not something that you can grasp onto at a personal level. People like to have an individual or a group of people that they can point the finger to and say, this is what is going on here. And this carries over very much into other conspiracy theories and even the UFO thing. If we look at 9/11, people didn't like the fact that it was just, as they describe it, a bunch of Arabs in caves plotting to fly some planes into buildings, and it caused this huge change in the world. It didn't seem proportionate that it was just a terrorist attack and then it did this terrible thing. Mm-hmm. And so they go looking for a bigger explanation. And so we get that same thing here happening with the virus. And the idea that it's just a coronavirus that has caused a pandemic is not satisfying to people. And they want to look for people, and they pick whoever they think are the villains. Now, in China, you have people spreading conspiracy theories about the virus coming from America. They say it originated in an American military base, and it was spread that way. I'm sure, and if you go to other countries like India or places in South America, you will get more localized versions of those conspiracies as well, because people want to blame somebody, and they generally pick their kind of favorite villain.
Well, even just to interject for a moment, the Spanish flu that we've all brought up here, that was named after that, but it didn't originate in Spain, but every country had their own name for it. It was the French flu, the Italian flu, the Spanish flu.
Yeah.
You just blamed it on your neighbor, but continue.
Yeah, and you get the Chinese coronavirus. Donald Trump was very adamant in wanting
China virus. I mean, they're still saying like Charlie
China
Kirk
virus, or
they're still calling it that.
flu.
All these guys, they're still calling it that, and it's really telling. Like, it's a very one of those, when people call it the China virus, you just know they're just digging their heels in that right wing kind of viewpoint, and they're not.
It's a deliberate attempt to place the blame on someone without actually having to give the evidence for it. If you keep calling something, then people will start believing that. Naming things is very important. But another thing with the parallels here is the issue of complexity and science communications, and the the opportunity it gives to people who want to spread conspiracy theories and disinformation is great, because most people are not going to follow the science. And the stuff that Kevin has been saying about the gain of function, and what you were saying about the protein spikes and things like that, they just go over the tops of the heads of people, and they're not going to follow what you're saying. So instead of understanding the arguments, they pick which expert they want to believe in. So some people are going to pick someone like Kevin, or someone like Fauci, or other experts who are more scientifically based. Other people will pick people because their conclusions line up with their political beliefs or their conspiracy beliefs, and we see that in the other conspiracy theories as well. They will pick an expert. You will get this, like you say, like 1 or 2% within a field.
Like the Pentagon, like the guys at the Pentagon that.
In the Pentagon, there's a very small. Excuse me, 1 second. In the Pentagon, there's a very small group of people who believe in UFOs, and they're running this UAP investigation program, and they're kind of pushing a bit of an agenda. But I think the vast majority of the serious people in the Pentagon just view this as kind of like a silly thing that also kind of overlaps with a few real issues like drones and whatnot. And with other conspiracies like 9/11, there's an organization called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, which has thousands of people who have some kind of architecture degree or engineering degree or something like that. But that's thousands of people out of a possible set of millions of people who have equivalent qualifications. So you can always find an expert who will agree with you. And that's what happens when you have complicated subjects that people don't understand, and it's a real challenge. And part of what I do is to try to simplify the explanations to the level where the average person can understand them.
Yeah, Lalo, any thoughts?
Just that Mick mentioned that people want to believe that this had to have been something greater. I've heard that from many people personally, said that it just can't be that something this big it wasn't thought out. What didn't come from a lab. It had to be in some kind of conspiracy, something planned, when really there's a pandemic every 100 years or so, really. And we were just due for one. But we're not used to it personally. So there's people who actually remember the Spanish flu. So they're used to it maybe, but the rest of us thought this seems like unprecedented. This must be a bigger plan. There's been plenty of global pandemics in the past that were even worse than this one. I would say also on the point of how people seek their information, that people in the majority do not look to the best sources on a topic, and that is the overwhelming majority of people. When they're looking, when it's a pandemic and you should be getting information from a virologist, people don't get it from the same person they always follow. I have a term for this. I call it prophetic information seeking. That people have a Joe Rogan, a Ben Shapiro, somebody that they follow who comments on everything, whether it's politics or international news or medicine or anything like that. Which it's impossible they can be an expert on every topic, but their job is to comment. So they will comment whether they know anything about the topic or not, because that's their job, and need to keep in the news cycle and keep commenting. And people want to hear generally from the same person over and over and over. They don't look for new people. I notice, my thing is, if there's a new topic, okay, there's a coronavirus, I need to search for who are the top virologists that I should be looking for, the people who have written books. No, people go to the same person over and over. And this is getting worse with social media, because now people can follow that individual who has a Twitter, a TikTok, a YouTube channel, and they can give their voice on so many mediums and give you so much opinions. And people decide, as Mick was saying, this person aligns with my ideas and my beliefs, and this person will give them all the news that they need and all every opinion on every topic, because daily they have to put out content. And you and I, Derek, know that putting out content, you want to monetize this kind of thing, you need to always be on everything. And it's not everyone who's humble is going to say, yeah, I don't know anything about that topic, so I'm not going to comment on it.
Yeah.
That's a very good indicator to know actually who is legitimately talking out of their ass, so to speak, is the person who knows when to shut up. The person who says, I'm actually not an expert on this topic, so I'm not going to say anything. Maybe I'll just interview somebody who does, possibly something along those lines, but I don't have an opinion. And you'll see that there are certain characters in social media who will never say that. They'll never say, I don't know. I have no opinion on this. There's no way I could be an expert to have an opinion, on coronavirus within a week that it started. No way. No, they'll give one.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Did any of
I
you
think that
have-
kind of goes back to like talk radio. Actually, it just kind of predates social media. People would actually become like Rush Limbaugh ditto heads, and they think like every opinion I hold, I have to kind of go through the Rush Limbaugh filter of search. It's not just like social media, but I think that's probably made it worse because now we've got a much narrower view on the world, because you can just have one person who has perhaps 10,000 followers, and those 10,000 followers become like his acolytes who view the world through his lens, and some of them become very, very extreme, and it becomes like cult-like to a large degree, where they have this charismatic leader who's just basically a pundit on YouTube who's giving an opinion on everything.
Prophetic information seeking. And that's what I call it.
the prophet.
Because it's very cult-like. Yeah.
But I'll confess, I sort of was a Joe Rogan cult member, and I was proud of it. I was very, but especially in like 2010 to 2015. I mean, you had a lot of great stuff. That's how I found Kevin Folta. That's how I believe I may have found Mick through that. I'm not sure, but
Was there? Yeah.
So there are some good things that come of these certain pundits or whatever, but when some of them start to become super biased or they sway to one direction, and people get older too, and I sort of grew out of it, I suppose. But it's a whole meme these days. If you find a guy on Tinder and he likes Joe Rogan, that's a red flag to run away. There's all these memes about how he's changed a little bit. Shout out to Joe Rogan though. Hope he's doing well. And so yeah, but Lalo, that's you're interested in cults too. I mean, you must see that parallel. It's basically what you're saying, that what Mick was just saying, that these guys are prophets and they're followed, off the cliff, so to speak. Oh, Lalo got muted.
Sorry, you cut out for a second for me.
I was just saying that's the parallel. You must see that the cult-like thinking, because you're into cults and that.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'll say, if we're going to start talking about cults, is I've noticed for a long time is that a lot of people misuse the term, and not that there's a definitive way of maybe defining cults. I don't think necessarily there is, but for example, I've heard Joe Rogan talk about bring to any religion, oh, that's a cult and this is a cult. It becomes used very loosely. Personally, from looking into cults and interviewing people who have been in cults, I would say cult is not the belief system itself, which a lot of people refer to this religion as a cult. You could be in a religion but not in a cult, or a cult and not in a religion. The cult aspect is actually how the social construction around the ideology, more than the ideology itself. So you could be, let's say, a Catholic, but if you don't barely go to church, you don't really interact with too many other Catholics, or you interact with a lot of people who are not Catholic, you're not in a cult. But if you're isolated, everyone you know is from your church, and your church controls around their beliefs everything you do, now you're in a cult. And this is why cults don't even have to be religious. A lot of people are in cults around diets or spirituality, or even sometimes exercise and these things, or just around cults of personality. People who believe in someone who's not necessarily God. The Osho cult, right, from a Wild Country, wasn't necessarily a god, but there was a cult around him. But that's what I believe makes a person in a cult is the isolation of a community where everyone lives and around each other. They dictate certain rules of how to live, and there's either a person or an ideology surrounding that. So I would say that is a good kind of standard. So to talk about when we talk about cults, it's more of a social construction.
Well, it's also the failure to question the tenets of a cult that maintain it, and also removing ideas that challenge it. There's a lot of interesting ties-ins between cults, and also the social interaction around these controversial areas and the social tribes that people subscribe to, which continue to reinforce their ideas just because they agree with the tenets of that group. And you see it in these conspiracy groups, whether it's UFO folks or anti-GMO folks or anti-vaccination. They tend to rally around and reinforce the central message of that group and defend the thought leaders who promote the ideas they agree with. And it's very interesting stuff.
And even for example, this is why some people will call like vegans a cult, not because there is an ideology, not a religious one, but that they will isolate themselves from anyone who's not vegan. So also, like, you're not part of my life, and you must have the same ideology as me, live as I do. And there's, as you're saying, there's very low tolerance of anyone who doesn't believe what the cult believes. You must be in line with this.
How can we, the other thing that just comes to mind there briefly is these cult-like thinking people, UFO Twitter or anti-GMO folks. They tend to sort of chastise you both, like Mick and Kevin, for example. They'll attack your character. They'll say, "Oh, he looks mad here." Like, they'll comment on your videos and like comment on your emotions, or to try to sort of assassinate your character any way they can. They'll never attack your arguments. Yet they'll bring up logical fallacies, and then try to just make you sound like that you don't know what you're talking about. But you guys always remain calm. And I think that's like part of what makes, people like me, as I'm watching or listening to you, go, okay, I can tell that this guy is remaining calm. He's not getting emotional. Like, and then there's all these other people that are just attacking them nonstop.
Right.
And
I'm Hispanic and part Arab, so remaining calm is not in my blood, and I'm fine with it. I'm fine with people not losing.
It's even in the Bitcoin community or the crypto community. You see the same thing where these guys, it's like a cult, because guys like Peter Schiff, not that I'm saying he knows everything, but he'll say some comment about crypto that it could go to zero, it's not worth anything, and these guys go, old man laughing, or old man yelling at cloud. Like, they'll just say that he's old, and it's like, you're not attacking his arguments. But
well, I find that remaining calm is just something that works. It's a practical thing. Like, if you start getting angry at people and shouting at them, it's not very productive. So remaining calm works. And when people come to you with personal attacks, sometimes they're kind of doing it in good faith, in that they actually think these things about you to be true. And so you can't just simply dismiss it or get angry at them for saying these things. They might be kind of revealing something about the way they think, by saying these things that are kind of hurtful about you. Like recently, people in UFO Twitter have picked up on a thing I wrote in my book about how, as a young child, I was scared of a book I read about aliens, because there was a scene in it where this disembodied hand was reaching down towards somebody, and that really scared me, and it gave me nightmares for a few nights. And I'm kind of annoyed that happened. And people say now that on Twitter, quite seriously, they make the argument that my debunking shouldn't be listened to because they're based in childhood trauma, which has made me pathologically obsessed with debunking everything about UFOs and aliens, because when I was 10 years old, I read this book that gave me nightmares a few times. And I think, this is ridiculous, of course, but it also kind of speaks to these individuals as actually searching for a reason as to why I don't believe their evidence. So from their perspective, they think they have all this wonderful evidence, and they think that their case is being made and it's been proven already. And then they see me come in, someone who's a fairly intelligent guy who sees all the same evidence that they see, and yet somehow I come to a different conclusion. And so they're searching for an explanation as to why I don't come to the same conclusion as they do. And this is what they come up with. So if I address that in a kind of a serious way and explain to them, was briefly scared of aliens, but then I became a big science fiction fan, and now I love aliens, and they're great, and I'd love aliens to come visit and talk to them as a real person, and they can kind of get to know me a little bit more as a real person, and they can see that that explanation doesn't actually make sense. Then again, they have to try to think, well, why doesn't he agree with me? Maybe then they could perhaps give themselves permission to question their own assumptions, because they've eliminated that one possibility. So if I was just to get angry with them for saying these ridiculous things and dismiss them and block them, I wouldn't be able to get through to them. But by actually engaging them, even on such a ridiculous point, I think you can actually make progress.
Yeah, Kevin, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on that, because for me, it's a question of whose trust am I trying to earn? And so when I undergo personal attacks, which happen all the time, whether it's saying I'm a, wife beater, child molester, all those horrible things that people say about me because I teach science, it's just horrible. If you Google image me or you look me up online, you would never trust me for anything. And that's the idea, to erode my trust. And if I come firing back with as equal, volatile, inflammatory, angry statements to them as they do to me, I alienate that entire group of people that doesn't know who to trust. And so for me to win their trust, I have to work with class, and I have to work with evidence, and I have to work from a place of trying to first earn trust and show people that I'm on the same side they are, that we're asking hard questions, that we share the same values, we're interested in the same thing at the end of the day, which is, better environment and sustainable farming and sustainable this is around the area of genetic engineering, for instance, in terms of viruses, in terms of public health. Those are the things that I care about. And if I come out as a flamethrower, it turns people off. What turns people on is when you are a survivor in the face of very deep personal attacks. And when you let people know that they distributed your credit card information, or your social security number, or their, the things that I've gone through with respect to simply teaching science, I find I get a greater following from that. So operating with class, operating to earn trust, that's really the secret to being a better science communicator.
Yeah, and I think what you guys both just said, just to me at least, it proves that you care about the evidence, you care about the issues, and you do care about the truth, and you don't want to step on people's values. You want to share those good values that are out there, because you wouldn't be pressing so hard to keep doing the work. We know Mick's maybe retired now, but Kevin, I believe still, he has a job, but you guys both are doing this for the love of it and for the truth and the evidence around it, not just for your own personal gain or grifting, like a lot of these political pundits are. Lalo, I don't know if you're a grifter or not. Are you?
If I'm a grifter, I'm the worst in the world, because I've never made a penny from social media.
Yep.
I've calculated, I think it's around like $6,000 over the years that I've spent just trying to be on social media and podcasts and everything. I've never made money from it.
Yeah.
Honestly,
yeah.
it would be too hard. I think it could happen over a long period of time of building an audience, but the only way to build an audience overnight is to appease and speak to a certain group with a certain kind of beliefs. And I don't fit in anywhere politically or in any kind of way. Any group I'm in, and this didn't start in social media. This happened to me in life. People inviting me to some kind of political meeting. They thought I was kind of on their side, but then the second I start questioning, I'm like, yeah, but you're wrong. You might be wrong here. There's some errors here. Maybe the other side has a point here. Kicked out. Go away. We don't want to see you. So if you're like that, you're not gonna make money overnight in social media. And and I'm fine with it. I'm fine with just having an opinion. I'm also different from Mick and Kevin. May I just been longer on social media? I'm not sure, but I did at some point think about like actually changing people's minds through social media and having debates. I've given up on that idea. I find it way too time consuming and frustrating. Yeah. I simply put out my views, my opinion, what I'm reading about. Here it is. You can look at it. but to actually one by one change people's minds, that's just too much work for too little return. And it's in the true believers, like it's going to be very, very hard. Like most of the audience that somebody like Mick or Kevin or myself are going to get are really people who are believing a certain idea, but are not that invested in it. They're kind of like, you would say, like center left, center right, something like that in political terms. But the true believers, yeah, you might be able to deconvert them, make them see reason, but it's work. It's work, and I'm getting too old.
You can do it.
Too tired.
Can I jump in on that
No
real
one's
quick?
paying me for this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I jump in on that real quick? Because I love the microconversions. And whether it's vaccination or whether it's genetic engineering or anything about food and farming, the emails that I get, not as much as I used to, but almost on a daily basis from a mom saying that her kid can go to a birthday party and now have a piece of birthday cake without freaking out about it. And that the kids can have normal lives and can have friends, or that somebody said that they went and got vaccinated, or that they talked their spouse into being vaccinated, or their parent. Those are the kinds of emails that just light me up, because it says that it is working.
There might be a difference then in our topics, because in biology, you see like real tangible results from convincing somebody of something with their health and things like that. But in the political sphere, there's nothing. It's a thankless job.
Right.
Yeah.
I see it in conspiracy theories, which you wouldn't expect. I mean, a lot of times, you're arguing with conspiracy theorists online and you think of them as true believers. But the thing is, you never actually see it in the moment. You're never going to be talking to someone online and then they're going to say, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to drop all my beliefs and change now. It happens over a long period of time, and often over many months or years. I mean, quite often it's years. And I've had people come to me, like the emails I get from people. Sometimes they specifically talk about how they were looking at me engaging with somebody else, usually, and they see that the other person was just resorting to all these insults and nonsensical repeated arguments, where I was patiently and politely trying to engage them and raising these good points. And they say that initially they were on the side of the other guy. They were the angry person. They were like, Mick, what are you doing? Like, spouting the government's conspiracy theory, like debunking. How much do they pay you? And they think that at first. But over time, they see what you're doing, and they see that you are a real person, and it does work. You're not going to change someone's mind there, but you plant seeds and you create a mental framework within which they can eventually kind of get themselves out of whatever rabbit hole they're in. So I think, even though it feels very frustrating talking to people online, it does actually have an effect, and it can actually help quite a few people sometimes.
That's true. Well, just
one of the
go ahead.
Sorry, I think one of like the base problems is how people get their information more than what information they have, and that's a very big and complicated problem that I feel just too overwhelmed as some individual in Chile to solve through Twitter. Because, for example, in Chile, the application for sending messages, WhatsApp, I don't know if you guys use it so much, but it's very big in Chile. It's the main application for message sending here, and people will forward these blogs or just these written posts that are very long, just forward them to each other, audios or videos of just all kind of crazy conspiracy theories. I mean, when COVID started, immediately there was just tons of fake information about how drinking alcohol can kill the virus in your system and things like that. And people will send them to me, or people will show them to me, and I'm just like, like I'll say, well, if you just Google it, if you just see, if you Google that topic, first result is that, from very legitimate news source with from an expert saying, addressing that topic and saying this is a myth, and I'll show them that, and they'll reject it. Like, but those people are sold out. Those people, are money from someone, and they'll take some forwarded message over that. So, even if I was to try and change people's minds, I'm sure, like, I've even had people say, like, I've changed their minds over times. It happens, sure, but on a grander scale, I think, we're still at a time where some kind of internet education is needed as far as how you find information, because we're given this blessing of the internet, of being able to look for anything, but not everyone is very good at identifying what is a legitimate source versus what is just a random source saying anything. I for a while I thought, well, most people would realize, maybe the New York Times over, Peter George's blog on, and he's from Kansas or somewhere, and wearing a MAGA hat saying, anti-vax is true because of this. You'd think so, but not actually. Overwhelming majority of people actually are not good at filtering information.
Yeah, I wanted to actually, that's a point that I have written down here. I wanted to jump to, coincidentally, just general education and maybe education reform. Now, for example, here in Ontario and Canada, everybody's been saying for the last 10 years, we need to teach kids personal finance because we got out of high school and didn't know what to do with our checkbook, and people are in debt and all this stuff. And the Ontario, they must be doing this elsewhere as well, but they're starting to introduce this into the curriculum in the earlier grades, like basic personal finance, and that to everybody makes so much sense. Now, I mean, this world is changing so fast, and we talk about information literacy and media literacy and that. And probably once we utter this, now it's going to happen, but this is, to me, something that needs to happen, sort of an education reform. We have this system of education that's built on these archaic methods of teaching. That's a whole topic we could do hours on as well. But I don't know if any of you guys have opinions on that, because what Lalo just said is so important, I think, for young people, especially as they're like, right, babies have iPhones in their hands now. So the whole identifying sources thing and that. So I don't know if you guys have.
I think it's very important, but I think we're also, what you're talking about there is kind of a long-term solution. You're going to get people, catch them whilst they're young, and then in 5 to 10 years' time, things are going to improve. But right now we have a problem with the people that we have who have already gone through the education system, and we're not going to be able to change the way they think, and we're not even going to be able to try to persuade them to use other information sources very easily. So I think definitely it would be great to have education reform and teach more critical thinking about examining sources and comparing different versions of the story, and looking at the motives of the people behind the stories, and looking at the quality of sources. Things like that's very, very important, and teaching the basic ability of simple science and math to be able to study that. But you're going to get people who fail those courses. You're going to get people who are not very good at science, and they just simply don't understand it. So you're still going to have this problem, and I think you're still going to have to figure out, how do we talk to people who have got sucked into the conspiracy theories and get them out. One of the things that I talk about a lot is the trajectory people go through when they go in and out of the conspiracy theory rabbit hole. And a lot of the times when someone they get red pilled, someone shows them a video or something like that, and they get really excited about it, and they start learning a whole bunch of new stuff. And during that time, it's very, very difficult to talk to them. But eventually they kind of reach a plateau where they do actually become a bit more open to new ideas. And so a lot of what I'm doing is kind of helping people get to that plateau, this kind of turning point where they actually are able to examine evidence. And a lot of the stuff you do along the way doesn't seem like it's actually having any effect at all. But when they get to that point, things kind of slot into place, because you're giving them a kind of a mental framework to judge these things. It would be great if we could instill that in people at childhood. But I think there's probably even going to be political opposition to things like that. Critical thinking. Some people think critical thinking is a leftist plot to
there could be a MAGA teacher, right, or something. But also, just to interject there a bit, we're caught up here now because we're talking about good sources, New York Times, blah, blah, but these are the ones that are posting these articles that science says the lab leak is plausible and UFOs are here. So we're even caught in our own conundrum here now, because we're right. So what do you guys think about that then, on the converse, like the media itself, not media literacy from the public, but the media itself? Are they interviewing the right scientists? Are they doing their due diligence at these bigger institutions that we trust? Kevin, I don't know if you have thoughts on that. Like, Kevin, did they call you? Did they not call you?
I could go on this one all day, because the major media, New York Times, is the one who threw me under the bus. And in 2015, wrote a story about me saying that I was an insider on the corporate lobbyists, blah, 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 like nothing further from the truth. Yet it was the story that the activist that handed them the story wanted to tell, as it would show in discovery in a later lawsuit. The bottom line is that what we need are better consumers. So yes, the media does need to improve. The fact that we lost a lot of science desks and science editors because of the internet and the loss of formal print media was a big deal. And a lot of our most trusted sources do have horrible soft science. Even Scientific American goes off the deep end now. From the 40s, this periodical was present, a great respected source, but now not so hot. I think what we have to do is be better connoisseurs of scientific information. And one of the most important parts of that kind of goes back to the previous conversation, is that we have to teach people that it's okay to be wrong. And that there's a certain humility, that you have to operate with humility, that you may be making a mistake, and that the position you hold and the beliefs you hold most dearly may be incorrect. And so challenge them. Give me the best evidence that refutes what I believe. And that's what scientists do. That's what I do every single day. I don't want to be wrong when we submit that paper. We want to be our own toughest critic. Unfortunately, there's a weird narcissism that goes around where we're searching only for the things that reinforce the bias that we hold. And that's what happens in the general population, to the point where we start to form these weird little cliques and cults where we only seek the stuff that matches our silo. And then we seek the media that agrees with our silo. And politics is a great example. And that's why that we really need to start looking at every single occurrence with a very skeptical eye, saying, how am I being fooled? And so when I teach my classes, I love teaching about the nuts and bolts of life. And we talk about DNA, and we talk about proteins, but we also talk about how we rigorously evaluate something with a scientific lens. And how do we know we're not being fooled? And what are the typical cognitive mistakes we make? And that has been, in my life, as a scientist and as a scholar, the most interesting part is how we are fooled and how we are manipulated, and the psychology of that. And it's much more intricate and much more interesting than any molecule I can think of.
Yeah, and just to reiterate what you said, it's a we are all susceptible to these biases, even us, as we call ourselves skeptics, or if you're a scientist, or it doesn't matter if you're not just a layman. We're all susceptible to these. We're all human. And that goes back to the UFO sightings, and people say, well, a Navy pilot or the Pentagon guy said this, and well, there can be a guy who works at the Pentagon who just believes in aliens. I mean, like Lalo said at the very beginning, he believes there could be aliens. I mean, just show me the evidence that there's one flying around in the ship. But until then, we'll reserve our belief. And again, we all have religious beliefs as well, and those are even harder to nail down with evidence and facts, because a lot of it is philosophy, and it's afterlife and different things that we can only pontificate about. And so there's going to be huge.
Can I comment on the topic of like looking at the New York Times as a legitimate source, because I was the one who brought them up, and I totally agree with what everyone said, that New York Times, even Scientific American now, or BBC or whatever it is, makes a lot of mistakes. And I've seen this endless times now, watching CNN or BBC or DW or any other news source, them getting things kind of wrong to completely, utterly opposite of what they're saying. Especially in the last 2 years, there's been a lot of radical political changes in Chile, and I've seen the international news reporting on it, and it's god awful. I would say they got 80% of it wrong. They were just talking to certain groups of people, and those people were just basically lying about what was going on. So that happens, definitely. But still, I would say, when you're looking for what's going on or what is the truth, you should still look to those sources. But I would just, to go into it further, I would say what you have to do is not stop at one source, because if you do, then you're doing what I said before. You're doing prophetic information seeking. If you only look at the New York Times, if you only look at Scientific American, they make mistakes. And that's why you should read them, but then you should check another source and then another source. If you want to know about UFOs, you could look at Mick, and then who else is a big expert on this topic? If you're looking into virology, Kevin, I'm sure is a great person to look into, but I think Kevin would agree. You shouldn't just listen to him. I doubt he would ever say that. Oh, if you want to know about virology and viruses, I'm the only source you should look at. I'm sure you would say, no, you should look at many other places. There's this book you should look at. There's this great person. And that's how you start leaning towards truth. Then, and as you start to learn about a topic, you start to identify who knows what they're talking about. Does this person actually, Kevin can tell, Mick can tell who's also an expert in this, really. Other people claim to be, but you guys know enough about your subject that you can say, he knows what he's talking about. And that's what makes these things still very useful. That yes, they get it wrong, but it's about diversification of what you know. But very rarely do people who follow a certain pundit or a certain blog or a certain YouTube channel and they follow it religiously, very rarely do they go to other sources of information. And that's the problem. It's not really how much a person gets things wrong. It's how much diversification you have in what you study and how much you look to the person who seems to be the biggest expert in what they're saying. Experts can still be wrong, but can really 50 experts across the world be wrong? Maybe, but rarely. More rare. Let's say it's less common. So that's I still think is a big problem. And to talk about YouTubers and these pundits online, one of the things that I also look at as a red flag from these people, and I've pointed out some red flags already, is that I noticed that the ones who want to keep this prophetic information seeking towards them is that they rarely mention experts to look at. Rarely will certain ones say, follow Ben Shapiro. Will he say, oh, on this topic, you guys should read this book and go this way. Go look at that YouTube channel. Someone else. Go look at this other guy who's a way bigger expert on this topic than me. They'll rarely redirect you away from them because it's not, again, it's about finance. It's about money. It's about keeping the focus on me. But a real intellectual who cares about actually educating people and changing people's minds, as Mick and Kevin has talked about, they will direct you at good information. And you both know that good information doesn't just come from yourself. It comes from reading other books and looking at certain experts.
Yeah, I would like to do that, but I think Kevin's probably got an advantage over me here in that he's in a kind of a real science field. And I'm in the ufology field, and there aren't very many.
I study religion. I'm worse than both of you.
Yeah, well, there's
at least the aliens from other planets are very possible, but
yeah, it's kind of science in a way because it's it's aliens and space travel and whatnot, but it's not so much magic. But even so, if you go looking for other sources, you could quite easily fall into the mistake with UFOs of thinking that all the sources are pointing towards UFOs being aliens because there's so much media about it now. And there isn't really that many serious scientists, if any, really. I'm not even a scientist. I'm just, a guy who's good at identifying videos of flying objects. There's very few people actually who I can redirect to. I mean, I would love to be able to say, well, go and read the work of this guy on this topic. But there's a few guys from like 30 years ago who did a lot of serious work on it. So, Kevin's got an advantage there because he can actually point to a whole bunch of things, scientific studies and books and other scientists and other science communicators in this field. But hopefully it's changing a little bit now with the media attention on UFOs. More people are getting into it, and it would be great if some heavyweights could actually weigh in on the topic.
Yeah, speaking of that, now that we've zoomed out a bunch, I want to zoom in again just to close off and on both major topics. And so with the UFO stuff, we have these questions like, well, the disclosure is supposed to come. Is it this month that it's supposedly on its way?
It could be in the next few days.
Right. So that, and the comments like, where are the Air Force to comment on this? Where are certain experts that haven't said, or people think that they do know what it is, but they haven't said it yet. So there's that I want to ask Mick about, and then also the most current, up to date sort of investigation into the origins of COVID. We can finish with that as far as like, will we ever know or not? So Mick, with this UFO stuff, what do you expect to come in the disclosure, in the
Well, there's this UAP report that's coming out now. The reason we have a UAP report coming out is that Marco Rubio inserted some language into a bill, and he was persuaded to do that by a guy called Chris Mellon, who works for another guy called Tom DeLonge, who was the lead singer of Blink-182, like a rock band. So it's not like the government has, in its infinite wisdom, decided to investigate UFOs and produce a report. It's kind of like there's a bit of political horse trading, a little bit of influence peddling, and they've got this language in this bill, and they're getting this report. And the report itself is going to be on the back of the UAP task force, which is a real thing, but that itself is kind of descendant from the ATIP program, which was this program started by Senator Harry Reid and his friend Rob Bigelow, who is this millionaire from Nevada. And tied in that, there's this other guy, this journalist George Knapp, who first got Harry Reid interested in UFOs. There's this tiny group of people that's having this vast influence on this narrative, and they have kind of forced through this UFO stuff. There's something interesting I found out in the last few days is that the FAA, the Federal Aviation Authority, has a procedure for reporting UFOs. And if you look it up now, all it says is if you want to report a UFO, report it to a UFO reporting center, like the National UFO Reporting Center, which is just this website that collates these data. But in earlier versions of it, it said, call this number and speak to the Bigelow Airspace Scientific Board. And there, somehow, Robert Bigelow, a UFO and paranormal guy, managed to get the job of being the FAA's official receiver of UFO reports. And now he is kind of the guy who's pushing this whole thing forward to this other report. So it's a small group of people, and I don't think they're doing that much. So I don't really expect very much from the report. It's going to be a list of things that they've not been able to identify. It's not going to have any conclusions. It's not going to say it's aliens. It'll just be kind of open-ended, and it'll perhaps create a few more questions and not answer any. So not a lot, I think, is my prediction for what's going to happen there.
You sound like a skeptic. What are you?
A little skeptical here, with good reason. With good reason. If you examine these things, they don't add up.
Fair enough. So now, Kevin, what do you think? I mean, this investigation with the WHO team, they've said that they've asked their questions. They were answered sufficiently. We understand that China is not going to want to open every single door, but we may never find the exact animal that this supposedly jumped from or to. So, but what do you think, or what do you anticipate might be upcoming in that investigation, or what should we wait for?
Well, I can tell you what I know from human psychology is that if they go out there today and they find a bat, and that bat's got a SARS-CoV-2 virus that matches the sequence exactly to the one that comes from that's caused all the problems, you will have 50% of the people in the world who say it was all fake, and that it was obviously the Chinese government going out and infecting bats with the virus, and that it was all planted, So, and it's the same thing with the UFO stuff. That if that report comes out and says that, these were atmospheric anomalies that were blah, 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 whatever they say, whatever they conclude, people are going to reject it. And it's because we're already in our bias silo. We're already there. And so it's going to take a lot more than evidence to shift us. It's going to take trusted sources of information to communicate those ideas. And that's where, I appreciate when folks like Mick and where you're trying to be straight with people and trying to earn the trust that way. And it is a marathon, not a sprint. And I'm in mile 5 of that marathon, I think, with the things that I try to teach about. But this is the environment that we're in. People are and it's going to take a long time to get our way out of it. And we're going to have to do it.
Well, Lalo, any closing thoughts? I mean, I personally think they're all aliens flying these ships, and the president of China made this virus himself. So I don't know, Lalo.
I have to insist I'm less of an optimist at this point than Kevin and Mick. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot for every person they deconvert, 1,000 more are converted. unfortunately. And unfortunately, people who spread conspiracy theories are much astronomically more popular than people who debunk conspiracies. And I would just say, like, recently, you and I did a spaces on Twitter about the subject I'm interested in, which is mandatory vaccinations. And it was just as an example. I see it as it's in a situation where you really can't wait until people become scientifically literate. The UFO conspiracies really do no harm to the world, but the anti-vax and 5G and all these other crazy conspiracy theories that keep people from getting vaccinated, they're too big, they're too widespread, and you can't wait for everyone to be educated. And this is where at this point in my life, I'm kind of not as big a believer in personal freedoms, maybe, or not so much of a libertarian, because I think you can't wait until people make the right decision in these cases. And I think vaccinations should be mandatory. I just posted today. We just had the conversation last week, and this morning on the news in Chile, there's a big headline. They were having people debate mandatory vaccinations ? So it's already starting, and I posted, as you saw on Twitter, that I believe that many countries might start doing this, or at least debating about it during this year, maybe next, because I just don't, I think there's too many people believing conspiracy theories, misinformation. I see it getting worse, is my point. I don't see things getting better with misinformation and conspiracy theories. I think the internet has given a space for people who spread conspiracy theories to spread them even more, and I see that they're extremely popular. And I think people who debunk them are a tiny minority. And I think it's a great thing what Kevin and McDade. I just wish they had bigger audiences.
Well, just to interject, we're seen as uncool by a lot of people. It's not fun, the stuff that we talk about, and being a skeptic. My friends are the same way. I have a lot of friends.
It's funner to believe in conspiracy theories.
It's way more fun
to debunk them. Unfortunately,
yeah, it's just kind of seen as lame and uncool and not fun.
And nobody likes a party pooper.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But Kevin, I don't know what you think. I've always said when people are scared of mandatory vaccines, I say, well, that's never even been on the table. It's not going to be a thing. They do it. They prefer to do it with education, and it goes against certain rights. I don't know. Do you think that could be a possibility in certain countries, or?
Well, that's a really tough one, because you're talking about the rights of the immunocompromised and those who can't be vaccinated. In frequent cases.
Well, they would have hypothetically, they would have an exception, but
yeah, let's say the people.
But I'm thinking, I'm saying more in terms of their rights as they can't be vaccinated, so everyone else should be mandatorily vaccinated to insulate them from the virus. That's kind of where I was going. And I'm a big fan of mandatory vaccination, not from a government mandate side, but from a culture side, where we live in a scientific culture that can persuade people of the right thing to do. And I think that when we start making mandates and bans, that's when it gets real tricky, because then you start getting people prickly about their personal freedoms. What we have to do is identify the ways that we can change the culture. How do we get thought leaders of all political stripes? How do we get people on board from all different persuasions to say, this is the best thing you can do for your community, the best thing you can do for your family, best thing you can do for you? And if you had, Bill Clinton and Donald Trump hold hands and say that on national TV.
Well, Trump did say, though, it was the Trump vaccine, right? We know that Trump got it. He said it's great, but there's still all these people that don't.
Yeah, he has not been overly vocal about the utility of this. And I think there is a political division there that you can keep people separate or siloized by the folks and I live in rural Florida. I'm surrounded by people who are unvaccinated with Trump signs still in their yard, and are nice folks, folks who I hang around with. But the bottom line is that they still deny the science. They even deny the results of an election. That's fine, but it shows you how far we have to go. We have to change the culture. And if those leaders of, we talk about cults and cults of personality, if we had those individuals come out very clearly and say, we need to do this because this is the right thing to do for all of us, for our communities, for our families, for our nations, for the world, those messages I think would resonate.
And just a question. So on the research that I did on mandatory vaccines, I mean, from what I've found, it's fraught on the left for certain reasons. It's fraught on the right for certain reasons. So they figure it's not useful to get the actual percentage of vaccinations up to make it mandatory. But why are some mandatory, like the ones that kids have to take in schools and COVID is not, because it's too new? Or what is the reasoning behind why that wouldn't?
I think it's been because it's been politicized.
Okay.
And that nobody ever politicized, measles, mumps, rubella, and most of those mandatory vaccination handouts or the mandates came from their holdovers from the days of polio, where children were dying in iron lungs. Where this is what we used to remember when we talked about vaccines. Now it's a very convenient way to ignore technology and to segregate people into camps that oppose each other's thinking. I think it's an ideological rift, not a scientific one.
Yeah, because you do hear these people who are typically anti-COVID vax do say explicitly, like, "Oh, I'll take all the other ones. I just won't take this one because it's experimental and it was done too quick," and all those little reasons that they have, which are not really true, and that could be a whole other podcast.
Those talking points were handed down to them, right? They went out and sought reasons to disagree with getting the vaccination that their leadership, the people that they trust, said too fast, too soon. And which is really weird, because I don't know that we ever got that much from the political right before. That's something that they always seem to be reasonable. I think we're reasonably compliant, that it was more.
Yeah, the political right has changed. I don't know. I'm just a Canadian looking at the American, so I don't really know. But the political right has changed rapidly and drastically in some strange way, and I don't quite know how to explain it. But yes, there's something going on there.
I agree. I think, but that's what's really interesting about this, and it seems to become from the folks they trust and the folks they follow and the folks they center around for trusted information, and they're always very skeptical about this new vaccine that actually was. Project Warp Speed was a brilliant thing of the Trump administration. They got out of the way and let the science do its thing. If you can hate the guy all you want, but that's one thing you got to throw a bone to him about. Why they don't stand up on that and say this was a product of his administration and decisions they made that got us this scientific breakthrough that has made a huge difference. That's where we really need to be.
If I recall, he also was pretty the Trump administration was pretty pro GMO research. Like I forget exactly what they did, but they even compared to previous administrations, like they really, but there's this thing you just almost highlighted where there's this thing going on in the background, the good pro-science stuff, but for some reason it's not part of the upfront rhetoric because of the way it affects the voter base or something like.
Yeah, it impinges on the beliefs of the individuals of that voting bloc that feel personal freedoms and decisions are more important than participating in a community public health initiative. And so that rift of, you're not going to give me a vaccination that's going to help public health because you're not going to vaccinate me. They feel this is a mandate that impinges on them personally rather than a step to protect a community, which is really unusual because most of these folks tend to be very religious, where community is in their church community is really a centerpiece of their beliefs. So it's a really interesting conundrum.
And it speaks to this lack of understanding of science in general, because the people who make the vaccines tell us they work on an individual and a community level. They are developed for a certain way. And a lot of people around me, friends and family, think, well, all the old people that are vulnerable are vaccinated. Why would I need to get vaccinated? Well, if only we could explain to them that the way that the virus travels, the mutations and those different aspects they're forgetting about, maybe they could see that and maybe change it. We talked about changing minds or not changing minds. I had a friend text me the other morning because the night before we had a little debate about it, and I had called him selfish because he said, I don't need to take it. Everyone else is going to take it. And he texted me in the morning and he said, no one's ever called me selfish before. He said, it hit different. He said, maybe I will take it. And so I don't know, but
we have a communication problem, not a scientific problem.
Yeah, Mick, any?
Yeah, I'm not quite as pessimistic as Lalo is about the effects of debunking. I think it's helpful in two ways. Like, one, you can help individuals, which is always good. If you find someone who has a belief that's wrong and it's hurting them in some way, it's great to be able to help them get out of that. But I think even at scale, people who are doing things like what I'm doing do actually make a difference. A lot of the people I talked to who got out of conspiracy theories weren't really from directly interacting with me. It's from resources that I've created or resources that other people have created. And perhaps, I'm in a field where we have this asymmetry where we don't have very many scientists working it. So there's not very much of the other side for people to go to. So I think me creating things like, for example, these debunks of these UFO videos or the explanations I give about certain things about 9/11 or chemtrails even actually does help at scale, and it can help quite a considerable number of people. And I feel like even though I'm not solving the problem, I am improving the situation.
Well,
Fair
I am
enough.
pessimistic because Hispanic and Arab, it's just in me to like see the dark side of life. But I will say that I am here on social media and doing podcasts and talking with people because of people like Mick and Kevin, and they are. Yeah, I'm pessimist, but you guys are my shining little ray of hope in the world. And I only wish there were more people like you. Certainly, I'm not implying you guys should give up. Quite the opposite. I wish there was more people like you and more passionate. And I think that's what's missing.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's a great place to finish, guys. And I wanted to say too, just to add, me personally, obviously, you guys have helped me a lot in these different topics of thinking. Lalo with your political thinking, and Mick with all the debunking things, and Kevin just with your general science understanding. So it does help, and if it's only a few people, I think it's kind of worth it.
Yeah, but you're giving us a
So,
bigger voice, right?
Hey, I'm trying. We're the little podcast that could, but it's. I think this is a pretty epic panel that we got today. That I haven't seen this panel before, so I think we're the first to do it this way. So I just want to thank you guys again for your time, and let's plug everybody's socials. And I know some people here have books and podcasts. So Mick,
yeah, my book is called "Escaping the Rabbit Hole: How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic, and Respect." And you can follow me on Twitter at Mick West.
And let's go to Kevin. Where can
I'm at Kevin Folta, Kevin Folta on Twitter. I'm also have the Talking Biotech podcast, now going into its 7th year, and 300 podcasts. Something in there for everybody, and you can follow my research in the peer-reviewed literature. We're in 121 thick documents that you can take a look at on Google Scholar.
There you go. And Lalo, the grifter, where can they find you?
I wish I was a grifter. I could really use the money. No, everything on my social media, whether it's my podcast, Twitter, Facebook, or whatever it is, I'm always at Lalo Dagach or Lalo Dagach Podcasts. So just my name, search it in any or most of the big social media sites, and that's how you'll find me.
Awesome, guys, and hopefully you guys will get on TikTok maybe soon and appeal to some of the younger audience.
We're working on it, though. I'm actually want to do a crop domestication series on TikTok.
Hey, a lot of people are jumping on the train. I don't think it's a bad idea. I know it started as for the young people, but there's a lot of editing capabilities on there. You can make cool little attractive videos. Why not get the younger people?
You have to start with it with some dance videos to get popular on there first.
Yeah. You got to do some dance, and you got to have a popular song or something.
Well, the format works. It's a great format to convey information these days, and it just so happens to be that it appealed to a younger set first. But I think that the folks who are my demographic probably appreciate it too. So we're going to go for it.
Yeah, there's something about the algorithm that works well because that's I don't know, it gets people what they're looking for very quickly. So anyways, gentlemen, thanks again, and hope to talk to you all guys soon. And all the best. Let's keep the science and the debunking and the political grift going.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.